webinar. We are just waiting a few more minutes while people are logging on to the webinar, so we will get started shortly. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Importance of the Natural Environment in Meeting Our Sustainability Goals webinar. We're just going to wait another minute or two as people are logging on, and we will get started shortly. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Importance of the Natural Environment in Meeting Our Sustainability Goals. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Christine Luong, Sustainability Manager with the City of Palo Alto. This is the last webinar in 2020 for our 2020 Sustainability and Climate Action Plan webinar series. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, the recordings and the slides are all available at cityofpaloalto.org/climate-action, as well as a compilation of all the Q&A from each of the previous webinars. Next slide, please. Tonight, you'll be hearing from Walter Passmore, the Acting Assistant Director of the Public Services Division of Public Works, Isabel Zarchuk, Associate Engineer of the Stormwater Compliance Program with Public Works, and Lam Do, Superintendent, Open Space, Parks and Golf with Community Services. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded so that we can post it for folks who cannot join us live. You are all currently in listen-only mode, but if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We are going to be using the chat box for the polls, which are coming later. So we will not answer any questions in the chat box. We will only answer the questions in the Q&A. And Immediately after this webinar, the recording will be available on our website, and the PowerPoint presentations are already available on our website for you to download. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Walter Passmore, who will provide an overview of our natural environment chapter of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan.
Thank you, Christine, and good evening, everyone. I'm hoping tonight that we're going to convince you that natural environment is one of the most important parts of the Sustainability Climate Action Plan. We are going to be reviewing the chapter as part of the SCAP, and we're going to be sharing some work in progress on meeting key actions. We're also hoping to get your feedback on the updated goals and key actions in the plan. So I hope you will take advantage of that Q&A and answer the poll questions. Next slide. Reminder that we do have 7 different chapters of the Sustainability Climate Action Plan. Tonight we're talking about natural environment. You can see my name and Pam's name on the list there. Isabel and Lam, our other presenters, are also on the team. We didn't list all of the team members, just the co-chairs. Next slide. One of the unique things about natural environment is that it provides co-benefits. So beyond the carbon emissions reductions that we address in other chapters of the SCAP, natural environment provides a wealth of different benefits, and we're all familiar with some of these, like trees make air. Okay, that's, some of the grade school stuff that we've learned. But what's really relevant in the times that we're experiencing right now is that our natural environment can produce equity. It can address equity issues. It can serve environmental justice. So it can address a lot of the real problems that we have in our world right now beyond simply the carbon equation, which is certainly a daunting problem of itself. But natural environment can help us do more things than simply address carbon. Next slide. I want to remind everyone with this graphic that each of us is a unique strand in the intricate web of life and here to make a contribution. Only through actions with all of us can we really tackle this global problem that we have with climate. So natural environment does have a very strong influence. Unlike the other chapters where we're talking about reductions of emissions of carbon, natural environment talks about how do we capture those emissions through sequestration, how do we store those, and how do we help avoid some of those. For example, trees shading a parking lot can reduce volatilization of gasoline from car gas tanks. That's just one of many, many ways that our natural environment can help reduce carbon emissions and bring our carbon system back into balance. Another thing is that exposure in the natural environment, experiencing time with nature, can change our attitude, our disposition. So the more time we spend in nature, the more we care about nature. It's a self-sustaining way to look at our life experience. And then I do want to mention a few things about ecosystem dynamics, because people are the most influential part of the ecosystem globally. Historically, we've lived within our capacity. We've foraged, we've grown food, but now that the industrial age has come, we're consuming things like petroleum and emitting carbon into the atmosphere and unbalancing the system. So we're going to need to control our consumption to reduce emissions, but also control our appetite for land use and and other aspects of how we manage our natural environment in a way to help bring balance back to the carbon system. Do want to remind everyone that all parts of the natural environment are interconnected. Next slide.
Walter, we're having a technical, the orange box is showing up. So Isabel's going to stop presenting and Christine's going to start presenting. So
okay.
This is the joy of Zoom, right? There's always got to be something.
Right. Too bad I don't know any good jokes.
There you go. Look, she's already got it up and running. She just has to put in presenter mode.
It's a good thing we have tech gurus on call 24 hours a day. Look at that. Okay. Next slide, if you would. There we go. All right. This is a reminder from some of our other webinars about the emissions reduction sources that we've talked about. What you don't see on this graphic is the influence of natural environment. And we think that the green bar that should be represented here would be somewhere around 15% of our emissions target. That's only if we take care of it, though. So as we're going through the presentation, remember that natural environment does all of these great things, but only so long as we care for it and make sure that it functions properly. Next slide. So this is the global carbon cycle. Want to point out just a few things as looking at level of magnitude. So most of the Sustainability Climate Action Plan focuses on the emissions, which is that 6.3 number on the right side of the graph. That's 6.3 billion tons of emissions. So not a small number, but you can see that the other numbers are even substantially larger. Those exchanges from the ocean, the exchanges from vegetation and soils are in the 80s or 100 plus billion tons of carbon. And then the storage units are in trillions of tons of carbon. So you can see that the natural environment contains a vast amount of carbon. And the point of all of this is not that we should not reduce emissions. We definitely should reduce emissions. We need to reduce that 6.3 billion tons that's going into the atmosphere. But at the same time, we need to manage our natural environment so that we can maximize what the natural environment is able to do with sequestering and storing carbon. Next slide. Thank you. Natural environment goals. This is our starting point, and this is the point in the presentation where start to think about what feedback you would want to give us on how we further develop this plan. So goal 1, restore and enhance resilience and biodiversity of our natural environment. We will talk more in key actions about what we've done to date, but we still need more ideas. Biodiversity is a huge topic, very complex subject. Increase tree canopy to 40%, and a future goal regarding the amount of impervious surface. We haven't set a number yet, but we think that we're going to look at a baseline and then potential for reductions in that area. Next slide. Just like the natural environment is interconnected, we have strong connections with a number of planning documents, and this is an interdepartmental collaboration effort. So these are just some of the plans that connect to the Sustainability Climate Action Plan, and our key actions relate to the goals in some of these plans. Next slide. So key actions: provide carbon sequestration and other environmental benefits. Some of what we're already doing is water quality protection and heat island climate moderation. So water quality protection through things like our green stormwater infrastructure, heat island climate moderation through practices such as urban forest management. We're maximizing biodiversity and soil health through such actions as expanding and including a landscape component for a new tree and landscape technical manual. And we're also focusing more on native plants. We think natives are one of the ways that we provide additional resilience and also a diverse ecosystem that is going to sustain some of the changes in our climate. Next slide. Expand the water efficient landscape ordinance. This is something that is on the horizon. The city of Palo Alto has adopted the state of California model water efficient landscape ordinance, but this could be expanded in the future to target subjects such as biodiversity. So when we're looking at development plans, we can require landscape component that uses native plants. Ensure no net loss of tree canopy. We're already doing this through our development review process, but we could enhance it in the future. And I think the big challenge, not only for tree canopy, but for all the subjects of the natural environment, is to engage private property owners as partners so that together our actions will be much more meaningful. And private property actually makes up a large percentage of Palo Alto, as it does other communities. So it's only together that we can effectively manage our natural environment. And then the third key action is establish a baseline for carbon storage of tree canopy. We are in process of developing this through our GIS system. And once we establish that baseline, we will evaluate the potential of local offset projects. Currently, when we purchase offsets, these are not locally sourced. So this would be a step towards having a small component of our offsets be locally sourced. Next slide.
Thank you, Walter. I'm Lon with Open Space Parks and Golf, and I'd like to briefly discuss some practices in parks that we have towards the natural environment goals. We have two key action items that we've been working on, and they are to reduce the use of pesticides in our parks. And then secondly, we want to enhance the habitat for pollinators in our parks. Part of the reduction of pesticides began in 2001, where we implemented an integrated pest management plan to assess our use of pesticides and work towards eliminating its use through reduction. We have been able to now designate 11 of our city parks and 8 of our city facilities as pesticide free. However, most of our parks were not in practice using pesticides. Designated specifically, though, are 11 parks at this time. For pollinator habitat, we have pollinator plants existing in all of our park system and in our open space areas as well. But in particular, through volunteers, we've been able to develop 5 pollinator gardens specifically to be habitats and the designated gardens, instead of like in our parks where they are throughout the parks. And so we found that to be a successful program as well. And if you go to the next slide, please. So the practice that we've put in place towards these goals is start out with being a leader in the Bay Area, assessing the toxicity of pesticide use within our parks, our open space, and our city facilities as well. And so since 2005, we've actually been able to reduce significant amount of our pesticide use, as in particular all the heavy, most toxic pesticides as well. Other practices that we put in place in lieu so that we don't have to use as much pesticide is we're now using heavy compost materials, and we're using mulch as well, as much as 6 inches to sort of hinder weed growth, and thus reducing use of herbicides. We've also strategically used a plant palette that for infill, and the idea is in troublesome areas we want to outcompete the weeds. So with the correct plant palette, we've been able to achieve that success as well. We've also used solarization, blocking out the sun, and using the heat that's generated from solarization. So the combination of both blocking out the sun and the heat as well to retard weed growth. And we have 2 nurseries that we've been able to grow over 10,000 plants that we've been able to plant in our open space and in our parks. And these nurseries are in partnership with nonprofits as well. So that's another area of success that we're proud of. And particularly these nurseries propagate native plants for us as well. We occasionally have used goats in needed areas. And then another practice we've sort of adopted, you can say, is that we developed a level of tolerance for weeds as well. And with that level of tolerance, that also lets us use less pesticides. And then on the other side of the other key action item that we're working on is our pollinator habitats. So pollinator habitats in our parks and in the 5 designated pollinator gardens are beneficial to pollinator species such as bees and butterflies. But they also serve other species. The birds benefit from it, and then we have ladybugs, and we're praying mantis, and we have other insects that benefit from the habitat as well. These gardens actually were through a partnership with a volunteer group that's called the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden Group, and it started out with 1 pollinator garden that was developed along Primrose Way, and then this same group was able to get some grant funding and expand to what we have now, which is 5 dedicated gardens. So this is something that's really helped us out a lot as well. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll kind of give an idea where our pesticide-free parks are and some of our pesticide-free stations, facilities, excuse me. So if you look at in this map here, in green, we have these are the designated pesticide-free parks. And then in purple, these are facilities that we designated as pesticide-free. And includes, the Mitchell Park Library and Community Center. It includes another large area, which is the Regional Water Quality Control Plant that has a good amount of landscape as well. So we've been able to designate those areas, those facilities as pesticide-free. And then in red, you can are the locations of our 5 pollinator gardens. And then what we have next is sort of to gauge a poll question, and we want to be able to gauge the interest from our community. And so you'll see a poll question pop up, and if you could let us know if you have an interest in receiving information on how to incorporate pollinator plants in your own property. Let us know if you're very interested, somewhat interested, maybe, and you just like some information to start, or if you're not interested. I think this, Walter earlier spoke a key point in regards to the canopy and private property being a key part of helping out the canopy. So along those lines of what Walter brought up, we think that there is a possibility, and want to gauge your interest of private property if you'd be interested in developing some sort of pollinator plants in your property. So if you can let us know. And I'll pause for a little moment for you to answer the poll question. And then after that, we will transition to Isabel, who will be talking about the green stormwater infrastructure.
I'm going to give about 10 more seconds to answer the poll before closing the poll.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your answers, your responses to the poll, excuse me. And I think here on the screen, you should be seeing the results here. So thank you. All right, and I'll switch over to Isabel.
Thanks, Lum. So for the next few slides, we're going to focus on the stormwater aspect of our natural environment, particularly green stormwater infrastructure, or GSI. The city's GSI plan aimed at transforming our traditional stormwater management system from gray or piped infrastructure to a more green approach. So traditionally, the storm drain system was essentially designed to take stormwater and rainwater off of the street as quickly as possible, since traditionally stormwater was seen as more of a nuisance. And while this did help with ponding concerns, it also led to some negative impacts to our local creeks and our waterways, particularly in our case, the San Francisco Bay. And so you can see on the top right side, this is an example of a bioretention measure, or a GSI measure, that can capture rain, filter pollutants, and then allow the stormwater to slowly infiltrate. And while the overflows do eventually make their way to the storm drain system, they do so at a slower pace. And while we still need pipes to help manage our stormwater, we can start to see green stormwater infrastructure as another stormwater management solution. And the city's GSI plan is based on this approach. Next slide. So I wanted to go over two key actions with you all today. The first key action is from the natural environment chapter, and the second key action is from our water chapter. And while we're not doing a specific SCAP presentation on our water chapter, I did want to highlight this goal since GSI has some pretty obvious benefits to water quality. So for the first key action with implementing the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan, just for background, the city's GSI plan was accepted by City Council in May of 2019. And while staff was developing this plan, we identified several different items for implementation, 3 of which are listed on your screen. So for the first, for our engineering manual, this manual will essentially allow the city to consistently construct GSI measures based on standard design drawings that take into account all of our city departments. So for example, we'll look at protection from and spacing from utilities as part of those designs. And so this will also help us streamline maintenance, assuming that city standards help us build things more consistently throughout the city. For the second item, for the Southgate pilot, this is a pilot project where we're actually going into the Southgate neighborhood and updating some of the bioretention measures to basically improve their function. And this ties into one of the key actions for biodiversity that we talked about earlier, since we're actually piloting the use of native plants here as well. For the third item, for the stormwater rebate program, the city currently offers rebates for smaller scale projects on private property, both residential and commercial properties. And so these rebates currently include rain barrels, cisterns, pervious pavement, and rain garden. For more information on that program, check out cityofpaloalto.org/stormwater. And for the second key action that I mentioned earlier, this one is actually from our water chapter. But essentially what we're doing is city staff within the next year is going to calculate how much impervious surface the city has as a baseline. And impervious surface is essentially any hardscape. So whether that's sidewalk, street, parking lots, rooftops, what we're wanting to do is calculate how much impervious surface the city has now, and then set goals for how much impervious surface we can either treat or reduce. And so some of the ways we're going to approach this is by obviously putting in green stormwater infrastructure to treat impervious surface. We can look at smaller projects like disconnecting downspouts to make sure that stormwater collected on a roof stays on the property instead of being essentially driven to the street. Or we can look at installing pervious pavement throughout certain parts of the city. And then in order to meet this goal, we know that the stormwater group can't do it on our own. So we are looking at collaborating with other departments, particularly departments like the Office of Transportation, where we can essentially partner up and meet multiple needs within one project. Next slide. And so we want to hear from you for our second poll question of the evening. Let us know which aspects of biodiversity you think the city should measure. And in this one, we're looking for your top 3 choices. And I just want to note, we have A through D to select on the screen. And then for choice E, where we write other, we're looking for what you think would be an important aspect of biodiversity. So if you select E, please make sure you open up the chat box and add in your text with poll 2 in the answer. And we'll give this one a couple minutes for you to respond. Okay, looks like we're getting some answers in the chat. Joanna, how are the responses looking like?
We are almost there. I'm going to give this poll about another 30 seconds, and then I'm going to close it and share the results.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. Okay, perfect. So hopefully everybody is seeing the results that we posted on the screen. So we can see that pretty even mix throughout the multiple options. So definitely some items for staff to consider. And it looks like we got 2 other responses, so we can check those out later. But it looks like at least 88%, the majority is looking for trees on private and public properties. So that's good to know. And we can dig into those a little later on. So thank you, everyone. Okay, and so for the next slide, we wanted to just give a quick overview of the different benefits that we see from green stormwater infrastructure. A lot of these benefits overlap with the co-benefits that Walter talked about earlier in our presentation, so I won't go through each of these, but I did want to highlight a couple of them. The first one being pollutant load reduction. So GSI measures are specifically engineered and designed to make sure that we can filter out pollutants, and so overall our goal is to ensure that cleaner stormwater is making its way to the bay. And the other item I wanted to call out in this chart is safer pedestrian bicycle facilities. So if you happen to catch the Office of Transportation presentation a couple weeks ago, if not, we do have a recording of that. We learned from our Office of Transportation that the city's transportation network will have to change in order to meet SCAP goals. And so this gives GSI in particular a good opportunity to try and incorporate some additional measures when we're doing transportation projects. So some of you may be familiar with the term bulb outs. These are transportation elements where we're focusing on bicycle safety. And these are good areas where we can try to plug in green stormwater infrastructure as well. So definitely some items for us to consider moving forward. Next slide. And so for the next few slides, I just wanted to give you a little bit better understanding of how green stormwater infrastructure works, both above and below ground. And so in this case, we can see that we have an element that's situated between the sidewalk and the street. So you can see that on the sidewalk side, we have pretty ample space for pedestrians to access that area. And then also from the street, we can see that there's space allowed for people to access their cars as well. And then in the bottom left corner, there's a metal grate. This is actually how stormwater is pulled from the street and enters into the bioretention area. So that's kind of the inlet where we can try to pull that stormwater into the measure. You can also see that between the measure and the street, we have a lot of pavers. Those are actually pervious. While they're not necessary for the design of the pervious pavement, what they allow us to do is just maximize the amount of stormwater that can be pulled into the measure for treatment. And so while the city of Palo Alto does not have this particular design yet within the city, we do have a couple facilities that include both pervious pavement and bioretention elements, in particular Mitchell Park and then our newly constructed Fire Station 3. Next slide. And so this is another example of a bioretention element, and we can see that this one is actually situated on the street itself. So in the background, you can see that there's some space for parallel parking. And then closer right up to the front of the photo, there's actually another inlet where stormwater can make its way into the measure. So what I wanted to convey with this photo is that there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to bioretention design. And so this is a really good measure to basically implement into projects because we can work around whatever site constraints exist. Next slide. And this is a snapshot of basically what happens underground. So we can see in this photo, we've got stormwater entering that inlet on the left corner from the sidewalk. Once it gets into the inlet, there's actually a perforated pipe that runs along the length of the measure. What this does is it's a pipe with a lot of different holes in it, and it allows the water to evenly spread out throughout the measure. Once it's in the measure, the different soil and rocks actually help disperse the stormwater, at which point it can be pulled up by the tree roots or whatever other vegetation is planted there. And so, most people are familiar with seeing, the plants and the trees and the soil above ground, but this will hopefully give you a better understanding of what happens underneath. And I do want to mention, obviously we heard Walter talk at the beginning of the presentation, but the Stormwater Group and Urban Forestry have been collaborating a lot lately to try to implement trees more often within our green stormwater infrastructure designs. Historically, there's a little bit of additional effort there to make sure that the trees can safely thrive with the kind of soil conditions that green stormwater infrastructure typically has. So a lot of room for collaboration there between our two groups, which we've been working on. Next slide. And this is another slide where we have just various examples of potential for green stormwater infrastructure. And while these photos aren't pulled from the city, they kind of give you an idea of what we can consider moving forward. And I wanted to note that the photo in the middle of the slide is actually pulled from a vendor website. But essentially, we can see that it's a playing field. Up top, there's a soccer net. And then underground, there's actually significant room for stormwater storage here. And so in this application, what happens is the stormwater is captured, pollutants are filtered out, and then this water is actually reused for irrigation in place of using potable water. So just, again, a lot of different variation here, a lot of items to consider when we're planning in the future for different projects. And another item I wanted to note is that the city's Junior Museum and Zoo, the JNZ, currently under construction, also incorporates some educational features into their GSI, which we're really excited about seeing the final product with that. So next slide. So now we've got another poll question. This one is related to GSI, but let us know if you'd be interested in helping to steward city-owned GSI measures. A lot of these measures we have cited close to residential neighborhoods, libraries, and so what we want to know is if residents would be interested in helping care for plants, maintaining cleanliness, letting staff know if they come across an issue on one of their daily walks. So let us know in the poll, and then we'll post the results when those come in.
I'm going to give the poll about 10 more seconds.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we can see, obviously there's some follow-up on the staff end to potentially provide some more information on this. We did get 30%, 36% yes, which is great to see. So thank you everyone for your input there. And then we'll move on to our last poll question of the evening. So we'd just like to know, would you be interested in attending another webinar about any of the following options? And these are all related to aspects of the natural environment that we've touched on at different points today. And for the last option for other, if you do select this, and again, this one is multiple choice, so please feel free to select as many as you'd like. But if you do choose other, please let us know in the chat with the question or with the text poll for what you'd like to see a webinar about.
I'm going to give this poll about 15 more seconds. It looks like people are still inputting their answers. All right, I'm going to close the poll now.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Joanna. Okay, so we can see definitely looks like there's some serious interest for urban forestry. And then a couple other options which we can look at once we get into the Q&A and let everyone know what those look like. But again, thank you everyone for your input on these poll questions. Really great to get your feedback. And then now we'll turn it over to Christine.
Thanks, Isabel. So like I said earlier, this webinar is the last webinar of 2020 for our Sustainability and Climate Action Plan webinar series. However, we have a few more virtual things planned for early next year. We're going to provide a sea level rise update on our sea level rise adaptation plan, a virtual forum to review the results of the SCAP impact analysis, and a final 2020 SCAP webinar. We'll also be going to Council and the Commission for study sessions on the different 2020 SCAP scenarios to get us to our 80 by 30 goal. And hopefully Council will approve the 2020 SCAP early next year as well. So this concludes our presentation. So we are going to keep this webinar open for at least 30 minutes to answer all your questions. It looks like we have quite a few questions in the Q&A box. So thank you all. Once I close the webinar, I'm going to post a post-webinar survey. In case you have additional feedback, I'll post that webinar in the chat box so that you can access it, and it is also posted on our website. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Great, thanks, Christine. My name is Karen North. I'm going to help facilitate the Q&A section of this. Christine, you might want to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So you can continue to ask the questions and answers, and we're going to try and do most of them live. So Walter, the first question is what is the goal for underserved neighborhoods and providing tree canopy? So Walter, if you can pop your screen on and answer.
So we did establish a goal for South Palo Alto through the Urban Forest Master Plan. It has less tree canopy than North. So we have been developing programs. One example is that we fund a South Palo Alto planting initiative with our nonprofit group Canopy, and we've been planting more than 100 trees a year, which is a relatively small amount, but those are going onto private property. So it's a way to help our residents plant more trees than they would be able to otherwise. And that money for the program comes from in lieu fees from development.
Great, thanks, Walter. There's another question for you. Will the tree protection ordinance be revised to allow a right of appeal by neighbors?
We do have a draft revision that has been prepared and presented to the Planning and Transportation Commission. That version does not have revisions on appeal rights, but that could be included. So City Council makes the final determination on all ordinances. Something to keep an eye on as we move forward, and certainly contact me if you're interested in providing further input on the tree ordinance.
Great. I'm just going to, since you're in the hot seat, I'm going to keep you going for a little bit. Can the city have a goal for number of native oaks, at least 1 per acre, to support birds?
We can. Right now we have percentage goals for street trees, park trees, and open space. So we have native percentage goals there. And we do not currently have a goal for 1 oak per acre, but I think that's certainly something to consider.
Another question, can you allow trees that require more water in areas of high groundwater level and in bioretention areas?
Yes, we're already doing that.
Okay, another one. All right, regarding ensuring no net tree canopy loss for all projects, how is the time lag between loss of canopy due to tree removal and replacement of canopy by newly planted trees addressed? And is that time lag accounted for in carbon sequestration calculations?
So obviously we do have a time lag between removal of a large tree and replacement of that same canopy by smaller trees. So we have a ratio that is at least 2-for-1, and in some cases may exceed 10-for-1 replacement, depending on how large the tree is. And the objective is to replace that amount of canopy within 10 years. And then what we've found is that those development requirements have actually contributed towards a net gain in tree canopy in the city of Palo Alto over the last 25 years, whereas almost every other city in the United States has seen losses of tree canopy. So Palo Alto is trending in the right direction.
Okay, so another question for you. Will the expansion of the WELO address the water needs of trees during drought? During the last droughts, the aggressive and indiscriminate water conservation policies and campaigns have caused great harm to the urban forest.
So currently the WELO is probably not as sensitive as it should be to addressing drought resilience concerns. And that's potentially an area that we could improve upon the WELO. I mentioned in one of the slides that we were looking at the possibility of having Palo Alto specific requirements that went above and beyond what the state of California requires.
Great. I'm going to let you get out of the hot seat. I'm sure I'm going to call on you again. Lams, I have a couple questions for you if you want to put your camera on. So what percentage of all parks and city facilities are pesticide free?
Designated pesticides. So let's start with, we have 34 parks in total. Designated as pesticide free are 11 of them. So I'd say, a little less than 1/3 of city parks are pesticide free designation. But in practice, for the past 2.5 years, 33 of our 34 parks have been pesticide free. We've had to apply a pesticide in one of our parks, and it was due to a thistle that was propagating in our athletic fields. And manual removal was not going to be successful on an athletic field, and we didn't want it to spread. So we did have to use a pesticide, an herbicide, excuse me. So in practice, we're not applying pesticides in our parks, but we're only designating 11 of them thus far.
Salam, while we have you, has the city determined a cost difference in maintaining a park that uses pesticides and one that doesn't?
We have not done an assessment in that perspective. No, I tell you, we've been focusing on alternative methods to control weeds instead, but we have not looked at a cost analysis of it.
Another question for you, can the city plant only native plants in parks?
I'd say, one of the things that we focus on is removal of non-native plants. And then when we do replace plantings, we look at the appropriate plant palette for the location. So when appropriate, we will make efforts to put replace with non-native plants. Our nursery, going back to mention, we've planted over 10,000 plants in our open space and parks. But when we can, we make efforts too. But we also think of the location and where it's going to be placed and what's more appropriate or less appropriate.
Okay, this is another question. I'm not sure if you can answer entirely, but we'll give it a shot. So I would like to see a pesticide-free Palo Alto ordinance to ban the sale and use of pesticides and herbicides in landscapes by residents, businesses, schools, etc. We've shown it can be done successfully at the city government level, so let's make it the law for everyone. Our pollinator and insect populations are plummeting across the country and the world, and bird and other populations are affected as well. So we need to do all we can to protect our local biodiversity and be a model for other cities. Are there any plans to move in this direction, or will this require a citizens' initiative?
I think, we've been working towards the city's integrated pest management plan. And right, I think our successes would be a good example to set an example of what can be done. I think that's more, but this question perhaps is more on the legislative side that I think from our perspective, we wouldn't be able to control.
So I can add a little bit. We typically don't do the command and control. We try and lead by example. We do a lot of education and outreach. We don't disagree that we should reduce our pesticide use, but to try and ban it across the board is going to be rather challenging, because there are some pests that do the mechanical or the mechanical methodology doesn't work. So, but we have reduced it significantly, and we have quite a bit of resources that people can utilize for that. All right, Isabel, let's get you up there, or Pam, either one of you that wants to answer. So does the city GSI plan take the roles of trees in slowing runoff and reducing peak storm events? And then also, what are some of the enhancements done on the Southgate pilot?
Yes, definitely. I'll start with the question about trees. So while we were developing our GSI plan, Walter was pretty heavily involved in that development, and just making sure that trees were consistently thought of. And so, yes, we are taking that into consideration. We're working on essentially pilot projects to see how we can best fit trees into a GSI design. The engineered soil that we're required to use for bioretention isn't the best for supporting trees, and so we're trying to find ways to work around that to make sure we can have trees be more of a common theme throughout our GSI. And so Walter's luckily not getting rid of us anytime soon with that. For your other question about the enhancements to Southgate, so thanks for this question. What we did was we wanted to revitalize that measure. And so we started with 2 in the corner of Pierce Park. What we did was we took out the rocks, replaced it with mulch, added a compost amendment. Both the compost and the mulch actually came from the city's municipal services center. So we took what we had on hand. And then we repaired the irrigation, and we actually partnered with Grassroots Ecology. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. They're a local nonprofit based out of Palo Alto. But they're actually working with a grant that they received from Valley Water, and part of that grant has a focus on native plants. And so while we were updating these measures, we actually put a lot of native plants that we pulled from Grassroots Ecology, their nursery up in Foothills Park. So kind of just all around, we updated 2 different measures towards Pierce Park, and we're hoping to roll out similar improvements throughout the neighborhood.
Great, Isabel, this might be also for you. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer it, so I might be able to help you, but can we mandate that all new parking and driveways and sidewalks be impervious concrete to increase pervious pavement?
Sure. So I did want to add a couple items to this question. So our planning department right now does have requirements when any new residential areas or new projects are going through, that a certain percentage of their area does have to be pervious. So we've got that element of it. Pervious pavement, for the most part, is still kind of new. We're trying to figure out the best maintenance practices for this. So as Karin mentioned earlier, kind of with the pesticide angle, we're not quite ready at the step where we can make this a citywide mandate, but we are really pushing outreach for our stormwater rebate program, where we offer rebates for pervious pavement to try and offset that cost. And then for city projects, we are trying to make this more common so that we can learn what the best maintenance practices are for these. So we've got them at a few pump stations. We've got them at Mitchell Park. So we're kind of working our way up towards being able to make this better understood and just more common throughout the city. And then if Pam wants to add to that.
Sure. And I can't turn on my video, but I just want to add that one other thing that we're focused on is that we would like to learn over the next year or two what are the best practices to install pervious pavement in areas with high groundwater. And as many of you know, a lot of the eastern part of Palo Alto has very high groundwater, and we don't want to mandate something that later on will be difficult to maintain for a private landowner. So we want to make sure that we really understand how to maintain these type of installations long-term. And so, you know, as Isabel said, we're not quite ready, but I think that we'll be able to do that maybe in a couple of years, at least to visit that idea and determine if it's feasible.
Great. So I'm not sure we turn on your video, by the way, Pam. Okay, so I think this probably is going to be potentially for Walter or Lom. So Isabel and Pam, you guys can hide away for now. Has the city considered implementing bird safe design and dark sky techniques into the SCAP to protect birds and other wildlife while reducing light pollution?
I think that's actually a Christine question, but I like that as a key action.
Okay, let's add, what about plastic turf or artificial turf playing fields, Lom?
And I'm sorry, I lost track of the part
just
of the
how's
question.
the city addressing the concern in terms of what is going on with plastic turf or artificial playing fields?
Let me make a quick comment, and then I'll let Lom give the park's perspective. But from a development review standpoint, we are updating the tree and landscape technical manual, and we will be talking about requirements for natural versus artificial in landscape installations for new development. Lom?
Yeah, the city does have some artificial turf fields. We've been a leader in this category as well. Our specifications for our fields at present are more strenuous in regards to environmental materials that are used for not just producing the turf blades, the artificial turf blades, but also the infill product. So we've gone away from the chrome rubber. We right now are using a product that has been tested both to our standards, to European standards as well, and it's been deemed to be more environmentally friendly than other alternatives on the market. In addition to that, we've also when we replace our fields, we also have specifications in there that some of the materials that is off-hauled is also recycled. So that's how we're addressing the environmental aspects of it.
Great. Another question for you, Lom, is has the city considered green corridors to improve biodiversity that link parks and open spaces, canopy, native plants, GSI features, just in general?
I'm sorry, let me look at this question here.
So green corridors. You want to help Walter too?
Yeah, I think from a perspective, we do our best to have continuity. We also work with the transportation department on implementing their goals to link our parks and trails. And then I think probably Walter would be good if you could help me answer this question as well.
Right. So going back to the slide where we had all the bubbles of different plans that integrate with the Sustainability Climate Action Plan, there are aspects of the city's comprehensive plan that talk about this concept of green ribbons that link our open spaces together. There are programs in the Urban Forest Master Plan. There are goals and key actions in the Parks Master Plan. And they all capture a very similar concept to trying to link together green spaces in a meaningful way so that we have habitat corridors, we have riparian corridors, we have continuity. I know Shani had talked about staging oaks. So, you know, one way of making sure that we have strategic habitat sites throughout the city is by linking our hubs with these green corridors. So we are doing some of that. I think the challenge is the either land acquisition or commitment from private property owners to be a part of a larger activity.
Right. So there's some, Walter and if you want to look at some of the questions, so there's some comments regarding in terms of how we maintain our shrubs, in terms of not hedging our shrubs, that square plants are not natural, about planting natives for all life stages of insects, basically allow the leaves to accumulate. So I think we should probably be looking at some of the comments that Shawnee's mentioned. I feel like they're comments, but they're questions, but they're almost comments in terms of how we could adopt our practices to increase biodiversity within the city. Do you have any comments in terms of how we maintain and manicure our existing trees and shrubs and parks?
So I think a starting point is that we have changed some of our practices. I'll just throw out a tree example because that's what I'm most familiar with. But we used to have a block site list, like a lot of other cities, where we had one tree per block, or maybe even one tree that dominated an entire street, and it was a single species. Well, we've gotten away from that and gone to an attribute-based selection system. So we're giving preference to replanting natives, drought-tolerant species, species that obtain the largest mature size and produce the most benefits for that site. And so, instead of thinking that we need nothing but southern magnolias on an entire street, we've changed to try to reach some of these goals that we've been talking about through a variety of questions that we're answering tonight.
Great. There's also a question in terms of artificial turf in private gardens or commercial gardens. So what's our comment on that? Not for big playing fields lawn. This is more for someone who wants the small patch of turf in their back garden or in a commercial area where there might be an area where people congregate, that they put in turf rather than a lawn, traditional lawn.
Yeah, so from the development reviews standpoint, we do not prohibit artificial turf, but where we have an opportunity to give discretionary comments, we generally encourage people to go with native and drought tolerant plants, which have a vastly better benefit for our environment than artificial turf. Despite the water savings, because artificial turf doesn't use water, natural plants can be very drought tolerant and not require a lot of additional water beyond normal rainfall. So we really encourage that as opposed to artificial turf.
Now, do we know, we don't have anyone here from Zero Waste in terms of how the plastic turf fields are recycled. Does anyone here know? Christine? I should be the one that would know, but I don't actually know. I don't think we've dealt with any of our large scale fields right now. We just end up replenishing it. Christine, do you know anything on?
No, I don't, unfortunately.
Okay. So that's a great question. We'll have to get back to you on that. There's another one in terms of, could above and beyond state WELO requirements mean less stringent water conservation measures, or do we have to comply with the states?
So we do have to comply with the water calculation measures that the state puts into the WELO. Where we could go above and beyond is by putting biodiversity measures in, requiring certain percentage of native plantings. So we can add additional requirements, but the water calculations are foundational to the WELO.
Okay, Christine, is the city planning to create an environmental commission?
At this time, no, we are not planning on creating an environmental commission, partly because we have quite a number of commissions already in general throughout the city, and at this time, isn't quite the appetite of creating new commissions.
Okay, and then since I've got you in the hot seat, the natural environment is important, but in terms of meeting our 80 by 30 goal, reduction of fossil fuels in buildings and transportation is paramount. How will the city staff council prioritize the actions to be taken?
So this year we've been working with AECOM on several components of the SCAP. They are currently working on our 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory, a business as usual forecast, meaning if we were only going to do the things that council has already approved and follow California regulations, how much would we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030? And then finally, the missing piece of the puzzle is the impact analysis. So AECOM is going to take our greenhouse gas inventory, our business as usual forecast, and the draft key actions that we've proposed that were updated with community feedback. And they're going to take a look at the potential greenhouse gas reduction of those key actions, as well as the costs and the co-benefits. So in terms of prioritizing them, we have to pick the key actions that not only will get us to 80 by 30, but also have the most co-benefits.
Great, thank you, Christine. Maybe you can answer this one too. Is the city planning to build or expand parks if when more housing is built in the city? I know this is tied into our comprehensive plan.
So I believe it's going to be next year that the planning department is going to be working on updating the housing element of our comp plan. And as part of the update to the housing element, various land use options are going to be incorporated within the housing element update.
Great. Okay, let's see. There's some more questions for, I think probably Walter would be a good one. Do we still use our famous engineered soil for planting street trees? Basically, I don't know if you've seen the comment, but which IARC makes them more tolerant of the extensive surrounding pavement, or maybe it helps them not break sidewalks with their roots.
At one time, we were using that fairly extensively. We have gotten away from using it except in rare circumstances. We are trying to more commonly employ soil cells, which allow uncompacted natural soil. So the comparison is that the engineered soil is about 80 to 85% rock, whereas soil cells are 80 to 90% viable soil. So there's a lot more soil for the trees and plants to utilize to get the water and nutrients that they need. They don't dry out as quickly. They're more resilient to drought. So we've been going that direction more commonly.
Great. Lon, this would be a good one for you. Walter, the big goals of this effort concern ecosystem recovery. Given that this is what we hope to achieve, there should not be any plantings but natives, correct?
No, I think we certainly encourage natives, but if you look at our historic ecology, the Bay Area was primarily grassland and oak savanna. So we now have an ecosystem that's vastly different than what it was, 200 years ago. So we can't go back. And since we have so many introduced plants, natives are not always compatible. And to have the population of natives that's equal to the population of all plants that we have, there would just be too many for them to be healthy.
Okay. Great. And then this is a question from Lindsay Joy. Are California native plants subject to Palo Alto's weed abatement code? I'm interested in adding milkweed to my California native garden for the monarch butterflies. You know about that?
I don't think so.
Okay, so
typically we're only dealing with introduced or invasive plants.
And then I don't know if anyone can really answer this one. This is Arthur Keller's question about what will be the effect of low-lying areas from sea level rise on flora. And that's something I think we're still looking into, the potential impacts of sea level rise and the groundwater increasing with our vulnerability assessment that Julie Weiss is working on. So I think you're just gonna need to sit tight until we do a little bit more analysis on that. But any just initial feelings on that?
I'm thinking that as we observe trends, we're probably going to be looking at scientific adjustments for natural ranges. You know, for example, if climates grow warmer, natural ranges for plants that typically were native south of us may be now native in Palo Alto.
Great. Just there's a comment here regarding the question about adding parks. The person should also look at what's going on the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan that's being discussed tomorrow night by the Planning and Transportation Committee. That's tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And that's how much parkland and opportunity to naturalize and expand a section of Matador Creek. And our team has been involved in that as well. So that is a good opportunity to comment. Another comment was that great article on the New York Times on how trees communicate with each other. Do we take this into account when we're planting our trees?
No.
Okay.
I did read the article though, and I enjoyed it. I think the science is a little bit young still.
Okay. And I think I'm not really, it was just a comment about having a local debate, but I'm not really sure what he wants to debate about. So it looks like we're over the time. We were going to go till 7:30. It's 7:40. We've answered the questions, but there's plenty of opportunity to answer more questions if you want to send them to us. We will be uploading this presentation, and there's also our on the sustainability website. And thank you all for participating. Christine, do you want to close it up? You're on mute.
As Karen said, please look for the recording of this webinar on our website. We will also post all of the Q&A. We'll write them up and post them, and especially the questions that we didn't know the answers to, we'll find out those answers and post them as well. And feel free to send any additional questions to us at sustainability@cityofpaloalto.org. We hope you have a lovely rest of the year and look forward to seeing us in more webinars in the early new year. Thanks all for joining us. Good night.